the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root, from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site, with Seth Cox on the line from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, and one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. And this is episode, this is the Get High episode, right? It's episode 420. I didn't even realize that till just now. Episode 420, and we are high on the NFL draft. That was the lamest thing ever. Sorry, everyone. But this is our draft episode as we're recording for the first time since the Cardinals completed their draft class. And there are some other topics that we could talk about, like I would say Simmons and DeAndre Hopkins not getting traded, Budda Baker not getting traded. But we are just going to punt those to our later episode during the week, so this doesn't turn into a 2-hour episode. And what we're going to limit ourselves is draft talk. Specifically, we'll look at our mock draft from last week. Terrible. Our overall takeaways from the draft, and then we'll look at we'll look at their first round pick, their day 2 picks, and then their day 3 picks in the different segments. But Seth, how was the draft experience for you? How did you handle the draft with you and Justin on your show?
It was good, man. I mean, we just caught up the day after because this got done late this year with all the trades and kind of everything going on with the Cardinals and stuff. So we jumped on it on Friday morning, and it was a good. Was
that your bonus show?
Yeah, that was a good bonus episode.
Sign up for the Patreon show.
Yeah, and it's one of those situations, where you're just able to really talk about everything and kind of work through things, and doing the whole NFL draft is always interesting because obviously we're not experts on every team, but we do talk about a lot of teams and a lot of players. And so what we ended up doing was discussing things, and obviously we make fun of Justin a lot. He's a huge homer of the Ohio State Buckeyes. So of course he loved the Arizona Cardinals draft, picking up Paris Johnson Jr. But more than anything, he was excited about how they went about it. Right. And I think that's like the talk of the draft world, was not just the Cardinals pick of Paris Johnson Jr., but how they went about attaining that pick and kind of going through everything. And it really became interesting to see Monty Ossenfort work everything after what was maybe disaster averted, before it started.
Yeah, the whole Tampa, that was we can, now that it's happened, we can crack the door open a little bit to some of the things we heard. No details, but first off, before we do that, we have to talk about our mock drafts, which were absolutely wrecked after the first pick, because Houston actually did the thing. They actually did the thing that made the most sense, and they drafted C.J. Stroud number 2, even though it felt like that wasn't going to happen. The betting odds, Vegas got it wrong. The odds sports books, they got it wrong. Bryce Young, we got the Bryce Young pick. That was a given. After that, I had one correct pick to team, and that was number 4, Anthony Richardson to the Colts. Seth did nail the Bijan Robinson pick to the Falcons, and he also nailed Nolan Smith to the Eagles, only Seth had it happening with pick 10, and the Eagles did it with pick number 30. And then we had a couple other picks that were in the right spot, but to different teams. He had, on the mock draft from last week, Seth had the Bears taking Jalen Carter. Number 9, the Eagles traded up from number 10 to number 9 to take Jalen Carter. And so we picked that pick. I had Peter Skoronski, I had the Cardinals trading back with the Titans. And and the Cardinals drafting Peter Skoronski at number 11. The Titans at number N, they didn't trade, got Peter Skoronski. So we each nailed a player to a team. Oh, and Seth and I both had John Michael Schmitz going to the Giants. Only we had them go taking him in the first round. He went to the Giants in the second round. But so mostly in terms of actual predictions, this was a disaster of a mock draft, which most people's are. Although we were kind of on point to kind of what they wanted to do, such as we knew the interest that they had in the Texans had in Will Anderson. We were sort of on target for a few things, right?
Yeah, I mean, we knew the rumors about teams really loving Paris Johnson Jr. We just didn't expect up and down with the Cardinals, right? That was kind of the thing is, once they traded down, we just expected him to sit there and kind of let the draft fall. But I mean, we talked about it on the podcast. I had the Steelers moving up to the Lions pick to draft Paris Johnson Jr. So I had, Paris Johnson Jr. going at the right pick.
Oh, that was another one you picked. Yeah, you hit the spot
wrong
as well.
team, and that's the thing is, and it's no excuse, but I really didn't think the Cardinals would do that. And quite frankly, and I'm interested in your opinion on this, because obviously hindsight's 2020. Do you think in the end that Detroit would have rather, I mean, obviously we don't know what Pittsburgh would have offered, but it would have taken Pittsburgh's pick after seeing what they drafted, right? Like the whole Detroit Lions taking Jahmyr Gibbs at 12 thing, like that
was crazy,
baffling,
dude. That was a ginormous surprise of all the picks that were made. So my surprises of the first round, there really were only two. One was, I think, literally the entire NFL and all the NFL fans, because Jahmyr Gibbs going 12th to the Lions. And then the other one, but although honestly, I almost mocked him to the Lions, and that was Jack Campbell.
Yeah, that was, I mean,
I thought about that, but I'm like, that it just like I knew that with the athletic testing, because he was one of the winners of the combines according to what we went over. He's a throwback. He's athletic, and it just felt like too much of a connection to put him with Dan Campbell in Detroit. I almost did it.
Let me ask you this: if you would have known they would have taken Jahmyr Gibbs at 12, there's no way you would have still thought, "Oh, Jack Campbell then is the guy," right? You would have been like. Actually, you probably would have been like, I have no idea what they're going to do.
Right. Well, it's funny because, the two positions where we're like, don't spend a first-round pick. They did both. Running back and off-ball linebacker.
Yeah. So, I mean, they were baffling. But, yeah, I mean, we had heard the scuttlebutt. I mean, everybody had heard the scuttlebutt about the Arizona Cardinals and Paris Johnson Jr.
Yes, that came on strong. Not just from that, like for about the week of the draft, it started coming on strong. Now, the trade partners, this is interesting. I don't know if you remember, Seth, because you brought up the possibility. Of the Texans trading up on the show on like the week before that.
Right,
only taking like Anderson first and then taking Anderson first and then trading up for the quarterback. But this time they went with the quarterback and then traded up for Anderson, which is incredibly interesting. Because we heard through our connections of group chat and connections that people have at little minor sources and things like that the Titans were involved in trade talks, okay, which makes sense. That was, everyone was expecting the Cardinals to trade back to 11. Everyone.
And then we heard late that the Eagles were
Right.
making
But
a
you know
run.
what? You know what that was, I think? I think that was the tampering thing. I think that's that talk that actually was happening. It must have been the tampering thing.
Well, I mean, the fact that they still went up one spot to get Jalen Carter tells me that they wanted Jalen Carter.
Yeah.
And when I got that, I mean, when that information started to come out, I actually put my money where my mouth was, and I bet on Jalen Carter being the Eagles draft pick, which won some money. So like that's the thing is like the information was good. We just obviously it was probably not what they were talking about with the trade, right?
Right. So when we heard the whispers of the Eagles in trade talks, that was probably the tampering thing when they were settling that. We found out after the fact that the Cardinals had talks with the Raiders, but that was actually after they had the deal with the Texans. So they were thinking of trading up from 12 to 7, and doing that. But even out of the first one, but just overall, it was covering the draft. It was fun. It was a lot of work. I'll tell you this. I cranked out 56 articles between Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. I was so burnt out, and I'm still not done with draft coverage. I still have stuff that I want to write. I barely got my draft grades done. I've got some other stories from quotes that we got that I want to write about, and I haven't done it. But I got home Saturday afternoon, and I wanted to do more. I couldn't. I got the free agent tracker, the undrafted tracker up, and I didn't write a single article for Cards Wire on Sunday, which is not normally my MO. But I couldn't do anymore. I had to unplug on Sunday.
Yeah, and sometimes that happens, and it makes sense. I mean, it's a long, long day. There's a lot of information, and you just kind of have to go through it, and that's kind of what they did. I mean,
but it was exciting. I mean, they had to trade down, you had to trade up, you had to trade back in the second round. They had to trade out of the third round to pick up picks, and and in the end, they picked up a first round pick for 2024, 2 third-round picks in 2024, and then in addition, they still have the 5th-round pick as well. I said, still counts. They added a 5th-round pick in 2024, but that was part of the settlement for the tampering, which we will talk a little bit out on Thursday. I think for his first draft, I think Monty did an incredible job. That it was, and I personally graded this Cardinals draft. Now I have written individual grades for each pick. A couple of them I'll talk about. People don't like some of my takes on it, but it's fine. You don't have to like it. But I gave the draft on the whole an A, even though not every pick was an A. And really, there's probably only one player that makes a significant impact in year one, and that's Paris Johnson. But the fact that they were able to add some pretty decent talent, I believe, and leverage their situation to future picks, I thought was masterful.
Well, and a guy that's been around us for ages in terms of reading our stuff, and he goes by Gungus on Twitter and all of that stuff. He tweeted it out on, I think it was Thursday night, may have been Friday. I don't remember the exact date. But it was on Friday. He said Monty picking up another 24 third. So far, he stacked a 24 first, 2 24 thirds, and a 24 fifth. He's acquired more future picks in the first 2 rounds of his first draft than Keim did in a decade. And that's kind of true, right? Like, Keim never manipulated the draft. He kind of always seemed to let the draft fall to him. He would make minor moves. We saw him make moves up that were never extremely costly for the Cardinals, right? But that was his MO. Is kind of just
he usually he did more trading up in the end. But
But it was always really. I mean, there was never any like super
the trade up for Buddha
costly.
was pretty significant. It cost him a first, but it cost him a second, I think, the next year. So the trade up for Buddha was significant. The trade up for Marco was not, but it was significant. It wasn't major, but it did cost them quite a bit.
But it was something we always talked about, right? Something that I won't even say talked about. Something we always lamented was that he seemed to never understand that he needed to think about next year, right? Or think about how to manipulate the draft to have weapons and things like that for next year. And in one draft, Monty Ossenford did just that. I mean, you know, you look at the Peter King quote from his NBC Sports, you know, article. I think probably Monday, I would assume, typically when he writes this stuff. He said, if Arizona, Houston, Tennessee all struggle next year and all finish below 500, the Cardinals would have 6 picks in the top 75, including 2 early in the first round. Ossenfort may not have gone into this draft with an intention of owning the 24 draft, but that's exactly how it turned out. And then it is. And I mean, you know, not to sidetrack this way too much, but one of the things you and I have talked about with what was going on with how he was building this team and kind of going about this offseason was it was always with an eye towards the next 2 years. It was cleaning things up. It was making sure that this this franchise was in a spot where they could move forward for the first time and not be encumbered with dead cap space. And you know, one of the big things that they would have to look at, obviously, is the Kyler situation, right? The Kyler contract, all of that stuff. And what they could do with it or how they could manipulate it. And they've done that now because if, and this is the huge if in this whole situation, if they have a top 5 pick next year that is of their own, and Kyler Murray plays, I would say, more than 75% of the available games.
And he looks great.
Well, no. I mean, if he doesn't,
doesn't,
and they end up picking top 5, right? Now all of a sudden you have the leverage of a high pick. You get just anything for Kyler and you move on, but you don't, while you're going to eat some contract with it, you're not going to be killed because you probably will have a rookie quarterback contract that you didn't have to trade up for and give up a ton of assets for. If you're good and you're outside the top 5, even outside the top 10, say, with your pick from, your own pick, the Cardinals pick, all of a sudden you just have 2 big assets, and whatever you need to go do, you can do without being encumbered or without worry of the future because, well, the franchise quarterback you have under a contract looks good. He's playing well. And now go get weapons, go get, defensive weapons, whatever it is that you need to make sure that this team is good. And doing that and having all of that in and ready to go for year 2 is just a brilliant way of setting up your team for the future. And I think you and I have both said this genuinely and we mean it. We have no idea whether this works out or not. We're not going to say this, Monty Ossenfort and Jonathan Gannon are the guys to turn this franchise around. But what they're doing from a culture and management standpoint is a complete 180 from anything we've seen in terms of the last at least 6 years, including the final years of BA, because we haven't seen kind of a cohesion and a vision with what Ossenfort and Gannon are doing together in a long time.
Yeah, it's very cool to see them trying to balance adding talent and trying to do it the right way. They're not trying to cut corners, because the Cardinals believed before with Keim that they were right there, that they had a good enough team to do it, just circumstances, and so they just needed something extra and the circumstances to go right, as opposed to, okay, let's kind of redo this base. And we're going to talk about with these picks, because there was a clear theme. There was a clear theme with how the Cardinals made their selections, and it shifted a little bit. And I will say that draft philosophy in terms of the types of players they got, it was not significantly different from the Steve Keim era, but there were clear trends, especially when we got to day 3. So let's move on from there. Coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's start with specifically the first round pick, Paris Johnson. What do we think of him? What do we see for him moving forward? That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals used their first round pick to select Paris Johnson, tackle, Ohio State, with the 6th pick overall, a guy that, if they didn't, we always knew they were going to trade the 3rd pick. That was going to be disastrous if they didn't, but they would have taken him 3rd overall. Moving back to number 12, they knew they weren't going to get Paris. And, I got a text from someone who said, I like the pick, but they probably could have gotten him later. We learned after the fact that the Raiders had him basically on the top. He was in the top tier he was the top of their top tier players that were going to be available at number 7. Had the Cardinals not moved up to number 6 or not made a deal to go get the 7th pick, they wouldn't have been able to get Paris Johnson. And there's so many layers to this. And I will say this, and Monty Ossenfort just doesn't want to give any information up. It's become very clear that the Cardinals, that Ossenfort and Gannon, that this organization is now going out of their way to support Kyler Murray. Going from everything you hear publicly about Murray, that's everything we should have heard about Murray for the last 2 seasons, instead of rumblings of whatever, some of the scathing criticisms that have come out from reports from the organization that made no sense at all. It never had made any sense at all of why you would do that with your starting quarterback. Glowing, just Jonathan Gannon has nothing to say but positive things about Kyler. We hear that, Paris Johnson is a guy that Kyler wants, and Paris Johnson is a guy that they get. This comes after basically all of the coaches and the GMs the GM that has contact, that kind of any connection with Kyler, they were out, and they went out and supported him as he had his Heisman statue unveiled in Norman, Oklahoma, the weekend before the draft. And so everything is sort of showing Kyler, we believe in you and we trust you. And I asked, and multiple reporters asked Monty, because and I will say this, Monty's not telling us stuff, because Steve Keim would joke. He made light of the fact that Kyler was always in his ear about particular players he wanted the Cardinals to draft. And Monty's like, I heard that it was Kyler's guy. I didn't know that. Are you kidding me? The whole nation knew that Kyler wanted Paris Johnson 3 days before the draft, and you didn't? That said, it's great to see. Monty Ossenfort, coming from the Patriots, believes in building from the trenches. They're building from the trenches. Their first pick is a versatile offensive lineman. Can play. It should be a pretty dang good left tackle. Can play other places on the line. He's the guy that Kyler wants. I like this pick on so many levels.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I saw a lot of the complaints, being that the Cardinals used a pick on a left tackle, and that's the one thing they don't need, right? They've got a left tackle. Well, I think there's a couple things. The first being, and we're not talking out of school here. This is a well-known thing. DJ Humphries is still sidelined. So the plan is obviously that DJ is the left tackle next year, but
things could change.
Wouldn't we roast them completely if he wasn't healthy and you came into the year with, and I know people like Josh Jones and you and I like Josh Jones, but wouldn't we roast them? Be like, oh, I can't believe you.
Well, especially considering the offensive lineman you had available there, because you could have gone Johnson, you could have gone Skoronski, you could have gone Darnell Wright, you could have gone Broderick Jones. There were so many options there.
Right. And so you look at it, so the things you look at for me is obviously, we talked about the fact that you've got a guy in Paris Johnson who's played I think 1,000 snaps at right guard. I could be wrong, but right around 1,000.
A full season of right guard and a full season of left tackle.
And he's excellent at both. I mean, excellent at both. The other thing is this, and this is, again, where I just get agitated because people act like because it didn't work for a player or a couple players for the Cardinals that it's impossible to work. You look at the names on the All-Pro list this year, the first team All-Pro list, and you got Lane Johnson, the right tackle, who, he played right tackle in college. He also played left tackle for a season in college, and it's worked out okay for Philadelphia, right? You have obviously Joel Bitonio, multi-first team All-Pro. He played left tackle in college. You have Zach Martin. He played left tackle in college. And Zach Martin's a guard. These guys that act like, oh, you have to draft a right guard to play right guard. No, it's fine.
The Packers have been doing it for years. There was a time where literally the Packers would only draft left tackles.
Yeah, and that's what you have to look at. I mean, these guys come and go, and and that's the thing. You and I both still think, I don't want to say assume, but think that Johnson's ultimate spot is going to be left tackle. But there's literally no reason that he couldn't play any of the four non-center positions in his first year. He's played on the left side. He's played on the right side. He's played tackle. He's played guard. He's literally done all of it.
Right. He hasn't technically played right tackle or left guard, but if we want to look at kind of the two important elements, has he played tackle at a high level? Yes. Has he played on the right side at a high level? He did at guard. So that he can at least the movements, which is the hard transition, is the movements. And offensive linemen will crassly say, imagine how is it trying to move from one side of the offensive line to the other? Well, try wiping your ass with your other hand. You'll get the job done, but it's messy. It's different. So if you can play the right side of the line with the right technique, which he did at guard, and you can play tackle technique correctly, it's not crazy to say that that the transition to right tackle wouldn't be any problem. And likewise, to just shift from left tackle to left guard, where he knows how to play the left side and he knows guard techniques, it should be fine. If we look at Josh Jones, okay, we'll talk about Josh Jones because he only played left tackle at Houston. And I would say outside of center that if for someone who's only played left tackle, that the most difficult position to play would be right guard. Because, one, you're not only doing the guard technique, but you're doing it from the other side. At least if you're moving to right tackle, or the times that he's played at right tackle, he's been pretty solid. You're still doing tackle things on the right side, as opposed to being on the opposite side of the line and doing guard things. Justin Pugh's told us in the offseason that he believes, and a guy that was his teammate right next to him in the locker room, suggested that Josh Jones playing left guard would be he would play much better because you're playing on the left side. And and Pugh himself said, he being a left tackle in college, he had more struggles when he played the right side. He was a much better left guard than he was a right tackle because he was far more comfortable playing the left side.
Yeah, and so that's what you have to look at if they do go with Jones this year, right?
The question is for you. Where do you think Paris plays?
I think he's going to be the right tackle this year. I think that's their goal.
I think so too. People is like, well, no, it's going to be left guard. Like, listen, and this is, I think this is a little bit of petty in Kyler. It's a little petty. You know what I mean? Kelvin Beachum. I don't think there's a problem with Kelvin Beachum, the guy. I just think he does not like the fact that Beachum embarrassed him, because there are some. This is not a super high report, but there's a guy who's close to Paris who was told from Paris that Kyler asked him if he could play right tackle. Now, we know that Paris was starstruck when he went on the top 30 meeting, and Kyler said, "Hey, Paris, come here." And he's like, whoa, Kyler, he knows my name. And he texted his buddy Luke Whippler, center, that everyone thought the Cardinals were going to draft, but we'll get to that. It's like, oh, Kyler knows my name, and Kyler tells him. And if we want some more evidence of Kyler taking the next step in his development, he is coaching up, giving some love to a player that he'd like to have in an organization, giving him confidence that, hey, I've seen you play. I like the way you move. I'd love for you to block for me. That's great to see. And so I think ultimately, if we're going to continue with the trend, of kind of respecting some of the things that what Kyler wants, we're going to see Paris Johnson given a chance to beat Kelvin Beachum at right tackle, I think.
Yeah, I think so too, and it makes sense to me. I think I think it's going to make sense to a lot of people once they start to see it, and then and again, I know we've looked at this a million times, but BJ's contract has a couple years left.
There's an out after this year, easily.
So I mean, and that's the big thing. He's 30 this year. They have an out after next year, like you said. Or after this year, like you said, where
there's no guarantees left in his contract after this year.
Yeah, and so you look at it and you have him cut if he's unable to stay healthy. I mean, he only played 8 games last year. I think that's a big thing that we got to realize. And so, again, this isn't you and I talking out of school. This isn't any insider info. This is just legitimately, you have to ask the question: is he going to be able to play a full season? And if he's not, the Cardinals have to do what's best for the Cardinals.
And that's one of the great things. They have so many options left tackle now, because Kelvin Beachum can play left tackle, Josh Jones can play left tackle, Paris Johnson can play left tackle, and so what we need to establish: the Cardinals are not looking to replace DJ. As you can tell, that he still has a very prominent place here with the organization, which is why he in particular was featured in the uniform unveiling. So that's important to know. So they have big plans for DJ. That said, that doesn't mean you ignore the fact that he missed half the season with a back injury, and he's at that age 30.
Right. And so you just have to look at it that way. So, again, I think Paris is going to get the chance to be the right tackle this season. I think their starting offensive line, is going to end up possibly, or is likely going to look like DJ, Josh Jones, free agent center to be named Ben Jones, probably, Will Hernandez, and Paris Johnson Jr. I think that's going to be.
I have keep an eye out on Dennis Daly for starting at guard
instead of Jones.
I would count on him being a particularly prominent possibility at left guard, especially when we heard Gannon say after his signing how Daly is better as a guard. So that's a name to watch. I don't have the information. We haven't seen anything yet in terms of reps and practice in the offseason, but left guard, keep an eye out on Dennis Daly. He's a former Titan. He started most of the year last year at left tackle, was abysmal, but is a better guard than tackle.
And so I think you have to look at that, and I think you have to. I mean, we have to talk about just how impressive what Monty Ossenfort did to maneuver to get that pick. Because I think the biggest thing that people are missing in the Paris Johnson situation as a whole is that they moved down. They got that Texans first round pick. Remember, the Texans own the Cleveland Browns first round pick next year as well, right?
Yes.
And so they got the Texans, which is likely, I'm not going to say is going to be, but is likely to be a better pick than the Browns. And then they got 33. And all of us were kind of like, was it enough? Like, I don't know. But the quote from Ossenfort to Peter King, said he did admit he made the first deal with Houston with the idea of trading back up. Like, he had in his mind, if we need to go get Paris Johnson Jr., because that's who they wanted. I mean, at the end of the day, Kyler's involvement, non-Kyler involvement, from what I've heard, is he was their number one ranked player in the draft. We've heard coming out late that they did not grade Tyree Wilson or they medically red flagged Tyree Wilson with the foot injury, or did not clear him.
Which
with
is
the foot
funny
injury.
because Albert Breer said they had.
Right.
That's weird.
And so, it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. But the fact that when he moved back up from 12 to 6, and he gave up 12 and 34, and I know there was in 168, and he still got the 81st pick back, I was like, yo, that was impressive, because
it also set up the other trade that they made on day 2.
Right. And so that's the thing, is like, and I know we'll get to that when we get to the second round, but like, think about it. Like, they got 12 and 33 next year's 1 and next year's what was it, 3 or something like that? I don't remember already.
Well, the next year's 3 came from the second deal.
No, they did get a third next year from the Texans.
That's right. They got 2.
Yeah.
They have 2/3.
Yeah. So,
but they got a deal. It was basically the Texans paid the quarterback tax for Will Anderson.
Right. And that's, I want to ask you about this real quick, because that's something that's been really they've really taken a beating from the experts. I'm not going to say fans, but the experts in this situation, that they overpaid, that they didn't play this right, and that instead of going back up and getting Will Anderson, who, by the way, I think you and I both had him as our top player on the board.
Yep.
But, this was a master class in really just going back up and figuring out and reading, I don't want to say a team's desperation, because I think that's overstating it, but reading that a team was willing to go back and get Will Anderson Jr. and, like you said, pay the price.
Well, and I think part of it might have been the simple fact that I think the Cardinals were on the phone with multiple people, and I think it ultimately came down that the Texans didn't want they wanted Will Anderson the same way a team might want to go up and get a quarterback, and so once you have other people involved, other teams involved, we go back to the Bears going up one spot to draft Mitchell Trubisky. They don't do that unless there's another team involved, and that everyone said they had to overpay, but the reason why they had to is because they had a guy they wanted that they were pounding the table for, and someone else was going to go out and get him.
Yeah, and so I mean, and Andrew Brandt's an NFL voice, and stuff, and he said catching up on this trade, Texans traded the following to draft Will Anderson: 12th pick, 33rd pick, 2021, 2024 third, 2024 first, and 2024 third. Very few, if any, NFL veteran non-quarterbacks would bring that kind of trade bounty, and so like, it's just. I just don't think it can be overstated how well the Cardinals were able to manipulate to get those players and make sure that they got the guy that they wanted, but they also were able to stack. I mean, getting the Texans 24 first is,
I mean, that in itself was good, because no one ever really thought that the Texans were involved, and we were all wanting to get the Titans first round pick.
Right. And so, you look at it, it's just one of those situations that I just don't think anybody really saw coming.
I will say this. If you compare it to the Trey Lance trade, which was 12-3, it was kind of equal in value. No, the 49ers didn't give up any additional picks in that draft in 2021. It was, and so they gave up 2 future firsts and a future third. The Texans gave up a current 2, a future 1, and a future 3. That's kind of right there at the price. Now, granted, it wasn't for a quarterback, but if you're talking from going from 12-3, you're kind of right there.
Right. And so that's what it came down to. And this team, I was just impressed that they came back and they were able to make these moves and make this work out and get something done. I thought the first round, I mean, you can't give it anything but an A, because again, whether or not you and I agree is a moot point, but getting your number one player and an extra first round pick next year is literally the definition of a home run. Again, we can fight about the Paris Johnson thing all you want.
And for me, it's like I love Will Anderson, but you can't complain about Paris Johnson. Like they're getting a a guy who can be your pillar left tackle for years to come, making your quarterback happy, improving the offensive line, which needed help drastically. Technically, since he is a left tackle, even though he might not play left tackle this year, you're still drafting a premium position in the top 10.
Right. And I would say whether he plays left or right tackle, addressing the offensive line and getting a premium position is a premium position upgrade no matter what.
Exactly. Coming up next on the Rise of Red podcast, Best of Cardinals talk. And let's move on to rounds 2 and 3. The Cardinals made a trade, picked up 3 more players. That's coming next on Rise of Red. We're back on the Rise of Red podcast, Best of Cardinals talk on the web. Round 2, round 3, day 2 picks. There were 3 players they selected, and the theme of this was football character. Was want to. These are things that Steve Keim talked about. This is football character. This is the love for the game type thing. But yes, the Cardinals were wheeling and dealing again. There was the report coming out entering day at the end of the first round how there were 3 teams desperately trying to trade back into the first round. The Cardinals, who had the second pick of the round after they had, they dealt their pick, the 34 pick, as part of their trade back up to number 6. And so they had the Texans pick, which was the second pick in the round. And there were teams that wanted to move up, and that we felt that was perfect, and they were able to do that. They moved up. They traded back. The Titans moved up, picked up Will Levis, and the Cardinals moved back to number, 42?
41.
41. It was to 41, and then after that, they picked up an extra third from the draft for next year, and then they also swapped So after they, it's important. It's important. Now we thought they were targeting someone in particular in the third round because they originally had number 66. That's what they came into the draft with, but that pick dropped down to number 94 because of the settlement with the Eagles on the tampering charge. So that was a big blow because they were going to have 66 and 96, but then they moved. It became 94 and 96 in their trade with the Lions. They moved up from 96 to 81, and then they in the trade with the Titans they swapped that up and moved it up to 72, and so they were able to get back roughly in the range that they were, that they were at originally, and
yeah,
so
about 30 picks away from their next pick, which people were kind of scoffing and laughing, but it really, 33 to 81 was about 50 picks.
That's a lot of time to wait.
It was just it was a smart play to go get that, and honestly it made sense with what they were doing, because as much as fans wanted them to desperately draft a center, it didn't seem like it was ever in their plans.
It wasn't. I do make a correction that when they had the pick 94, they didn't move up. They just added the Detroit pick, so at 81. So they ended up with, they had 81, 94, 96.
Yeah, they had 33. They came into day 2 with 33, 81. Oh no, sorry, because they 33, 94, 96. Right.
No, they also had 81 from the trade with Detroit, and then they parlayed.
Oh, that's right. So
they entered day 2 with 33, 81, 94, 96. They traded back down. They traded down, and then moved from 81 to 72, and so it just gave it. They still had the 94 and 96 as we later on found out, because the 96 they traded out of. Blah 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 blah. But. It just was more draft manipulation. It was maneuvering. It was, we've seen the Patriots do this for years. Just try to get into the right range. The Cardinals, like Steve Keim, didn't, for whatever reason, maybe it was just the priorities they had, were never able to do that. So they moved back, added capital. They leveraged picks for future picks. Which was good to see. So they picked up an addition. So now, as of right now, they've got 2 first-round picks, a second-round pick, and 3 third-round picks in the 2024 draft, which is fantastic. But then in round 2, I will say this. After they went tackle round 1, I was hoping to see them go either edge or cornerback. I was surprised. B.J. Ojulari was ultimately the pick out of LSU, was not the pick I would have made, personally. Based on the guys that were on the board, I personally would have liked Keon White. I do see why in part.
Did you prefer White because he was more of a traditional,
yes,
five tech edge?
He had the athleticism, he had incredible length, and he had the bigger size to play the D end position. And then I didn't realize, and I was looking at the 2, Keon White was much older. He was already 24.
Yeah, he's older. He's got nothing like that jumps out at you in terms of negativity in terms of him as a player, but he does have some interesting things, and that's the thing. You at the end of the day, if the Pats take a guy, it's probably safe to assume he's a talented player, but there's some interesting things with him overall that it made sense that they went with a guy that can win off the edge consistently, as opposed to a guy that is more of a power player that has good size and speed, but doesn't have any pass rushing ability as of now.
Yeah. Ojulari is interesting because he fits like football character, like at LSU. And this is not something I was personally aware of or had not studied a ton. Number 18 is a significant number in LSU's history. When a player is awarded number 18, it's kind of like the number 42 for the Sun Devils in a way. But so the player who gets selected to wear number 18, that's a significant type thing in terms of football character, production, and everything. And Ojulari was the guy to wear number 18 for the Tigers last year. Very athletic, a little undersized, good. But like some people were kind of comparing him to Hassan Reddick. He is a much longer player than Hassan, and not nearly as explosive. Do you see him? I'm still not like. It's interesting how the Cardinals have their roster set up. It's almost built like they're going to have a 3-4 look. I'm convinced they're going to they will make roster position changes later as we get closer to the season. But Ojulari would kind of be a better 3-4 linebacker, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I mean, you could look at it that way. I think there's a couple things you can look at. One, he can play that overhang, similar to what we saw with what like you talked about with Hassan Reddick. He's not as explosive athletically, but he is a guy that has good explosive numbers in terms of the broad jump, which is something you and I have talked about is more important for edge rushers than a lot of things. And then you talked about he's got really long arms. He's got great arm length, which allows him,
which is really good. When you rush off the ball, it's a little bit less important, but when you're there on the edge, it is much more important against those tackles.
Right, and he's able to utilize that. He's got a vast array of pass rushing moves already, which is also, something, like I said, with Keon White, who's probably what you would call a higher floor prospect.
Yeah,
he's a I hate saying stuff like that, but he's a guy that you probably have a lower. Keon White's a higher ceiling prospect, but a much, much lower floor, right? Whereas
potentially,
Ojulari is more of a, I don't want to say safe in any way, shape, or form, but he's a guy that can go and get you, 6 to 8 sacks a year consistently, and that's a big deal and something that I think gets overlooked a lot. By a lot of guys, is that people look at it and say, well, if you're not a 12 plus sack a year guy, you're useless. It's like, no. A guy that averages 6 to 8 sacks a year
you need other guys to get sacks on your team unless you have Nick Bosa or TJ Watt.
Right. And even then, you look at it, there's been conversations in the last couple days I've read where, that's one of the things 49ers fans are talking about, is like, hey, God forbid Nick Bosa gets hurt again. There's no depth to the pass rushing unless they're moving Eric Armstead back out there, right? So, there's some guys that he has a good comparison to, and I text Justin. I think he's asleep because it's 11:45 there. Because I can't remember the guy that he and I talked about that he's comps pretty well to. I think it might have been Emmanuel Ogba, but I could be wrong. When I get the information, I'll share it. But yeah, because Ogba was 20 pounds heavier, so it's probably not Ogba, but same type of good vertical, good broad,
and productive. He had, if you talk about the analytical type pressures, the only one who had more pressures than him over the last couple of years, Will Anderson. That's significant.
Right. And again, in the SEC. So it's one of those things that we talk about quite a bit. When you have a guy that does it at the highest level in terms of college football, that's a great thing. He's going to have to get a little stronger at the point of attack. That's his biggest, knock and weakness, but he's a good guy. He's a, I think it's a big victory in terms of fit and what they need.
The next pick that they made there at 72 was that of Syracuse cornerback Garrett Williams, a guy who was one of their top 30 meetings. It was not a surprise pick, but it wasn't necessarily the pick I would have made, especially with some of the corners on the board. Williams, who started his career at Syracuse, and he played really well.
Oh, man. And sorry, real quick. I just remembered what the comp is for Ojulari. Sorry, it's Harold Landry.
That's right. You texted me that during the draft. Yeah, Harold Landry, which makes a lot of sense because Tennessee. He played in Tennessee.
Right, yeah. And, I mean, you look at it, same type of size, 6'2", 250. Landry was a little not as long, but same type of, athleticism. And so it'll be interesting to see how they, how that fits out. And like I said, the irony of it was they were both picked at pick 41.
Yeah. So the Garrett Williams selection, pretty good tape, pretty good production. The problem was he tore his ACL last season, and so he's not going to be – he didn't do any athletic testing, couldn't. He's not going to be ready. He says he's going to be ready in July. He's a tad undersized. He makes some of that up with longer arms. But athletically, he is average. He's an average athletic, and he's coming off an ACL tear. For me, there's things to like, especially with the type of player, the type of person he is. He fits perfectly. High football character. He really connected with Jonathan Gannon, based on the post draft, the conference call right after he was drafted. But like for me, that was one of my question marks. Like it has some, there's a potential there of being a very, very good player. But I thought it was one of the riskier picks in terms of potential production. You get a guy in the third round. Now we've seen third rounders like do nothing, but I think he provides one of the biggest question marks because he's not a plus athlete, and he's undersized, and he's coming off the knee injury. So you wonder what his ceiling can be.
Yeah, and you look at, Williams, he's a guy that, like you said, 5'10", 190. But he's a guy that plays physical. He's a guy that, is aggressive, which is something that, is important to Gannon and what he looks for in cornerbacks, right? He's those type of players, they want guys that are hard nosed, that like to mix it up. I mean, all the little, what's the word I'm looking for? All the little cliches that come like that, right? And so you look at it from that perspective. He comps out, and I know people might poo-poo this or say it's not great, but like a Jordan Lewis type, who's been a decent corner for the Cowboys over the last 6 seasons. I think he got hurt this year, but he's been a guy for a third round pick that has started 43 games and did all that. And when you look at it, it's a third round pick. Like you're taking swings on certain things, right? And the thing with Williams is that he was a highly productive guy before the injury, especially that sophomore season or freshman. I don't know what they consider these things anymore. But his first 2 years, right? He had 9 passes defensed, 2 interceptions his first year. Followed it up with 9 passes defensed. And then this year in 7 games, he had 3 passes defensed and 2 interceptions. So he's right at that 1 a game. He played in 28 games. He had 25, either passes defense, interceptions. So he's right near that 1, which is what you're looking for in a corner, is a guy that has that on-ball productivity, is able to work that way. You know, you look at it in high school coming out, and I know high school testing numbers aren't anything that you can like really lean into in terms of making sure that they're um, that they comp down well, but like he ran a 4.6, had a 4.2 shuttle, which is good, and then he's had a 34-inch vertical, and that was as an 18-year-old. So like again, that's the 4.6 is obviously people are gonna, but the 4.2 and the 34-inch vert as an 18-year-old, now a 21-year-old would be you know, that's a good place. And so if you give him, you know, a little room, you say he's a high 4.4 guy, which I think he probably would, and you know, probably a low 4 shuttle time, and probably improve that vertical just a couple inches, you know, 36, 37. That
does
that
make
makes
him slightly more. That's slightly plus, but the numbers that we have make him pretty average.
Right, but we don't have any testing numbers, right?
That's true. He had no testing numbers at all.
Right, and so, you know, you look at it. So I'm looking, like I said, the physical comp, which is again all we have right now. Jordan Lewis, and Lewis got picked in the third round, 5'10", 188. So again, almost the same size. He ran a 4.54 40, 34.5-inch vertical, which is basically what Williams already had. So you know, it's one of those things where I think, you know, I like the player because I like the way he plays the game. I'm with you in a couple things. Like I'm wary. I don't know what the term is, but I'm wary of guys coming off an ACL that soon. You know, like you said, I think you were one of the guys that asked it or had it. You know, he's going to be ready for July camp. That's what he's saying. He's going to be ready for training camp. It's just, and again, we have to get, especially third rounders, we have to get past the idea of that they have to be immediate contributors. It feels like this is a pick for 2024 more.
Right. Which, that's not bad because the cornerback situation.
No,
they got.
All.
I mean, you've got Rashad Fenton. He'll be a free agent after a year. Antonio Hamilton will be free agent again. Marco Wilson. I mean, Marco Wilson's entering year 3, so we don't know what to expect for him. So it's not a bad pick. The next pick that they made in round 3 of they had 3 picks in the third round going in. So they traded out of number 96 because they didn't have any 4th or 5th round picks, and so they picked up a 4th round and 2 5th round picks. And so they made sure that they had selections there, so they traded out of 96. But before they did that, at number 94, they took Stanford receiver Michael Wilson. Wilson, for me, I find fascinating. I find his athletic profile fascinating because he has plus athleticism in some metrics and really bad in others. Like his 40 time, 4.58, is in the 22nd percentile, but his 10-yard split is insane. His 10-yard split is 1.5, which puts him in the 87th percentile. So he is extremely quick, like initially.
And that shows, I mean, you look at it, it shows up.
His 20-yard shuttle is also below average for receivers. We didn't see a 3-cone, so it probably would have been, well, I'm guessing that the 3-cone probably would have been average at best, but he's got explosive jumps, good height, super strong. So, and he can block. At 6'2", you add some height to that receiver room. He has good hand size, but he does have, for being a 6'2" guy, he has short arms for that height. That said, he's injury prone, sort of. He's never had soft tissue injuries, which is one thing. That's Rondale Moore always had that. He's had bone injuries, broken collarbone, broken foot, broken hand.
Which, again, for a big physical guy is odd, but also not odd, because one of the best things about him one of the biggest pluses about him is he's an uber physical blocking receiver. And we've talked about this, man. I really think he's a guy that fits into what they want to do, being run the football in too tight, too wide splits more consistently, and he'll be 100% from day one their best blocker, right?
Yeah, potentially. Like he and Zach Pascal, like they got two physical blockers now in terms of receivers, and Hopkins will do a little bit too. So they maintain because they now you keep Hopkins, you've got Pascal, and then you've got now Wilson, and now you've got a little bit of size to go along with your little guys in Rondale Moore, Greg Dortch, and Hollywood. What does he play this year? I don't know how much he plays, but there is some potential there. But what did they like most about him? They liked the type of player he was. So the theme of day one and day two was character. Now we got high production, like Paris Jones, great player, but the interaction, the type of person, the type of guy, the type of teammate, they're going to be high character type players. That was purposely the theme, and Monty even said that as well, that was kind of one of the themes going in. I tried to coax a theme out of him on day three. He wasn't having anything of it, but you could definitely tell that they were purposefully getting guys, and at least on day two in the third round, you have guys coming off of injuries. Now, Michael Wilson, he's completely healthy because he's recovered from the collarbone. They were willing to, in these cases, take look past the injury and expect recovery for high character guys to add to the locker room. The Cardinals, they drafted several captains. We saw Steve Kimes do the same thing. That's good for the locker room. And guys as well who already graduated with their degree. So that also adds to the intelligence side of things.
Yeah, and I think one of the things to mention real quick is that, like, Wilson's comp, which is, I would still say fairly high end, I want to get your opinion on this, is Mohamed Sanu.
It's not bad. Sanu was super productive for a while.
Right. I mean, averaged, in a span from 2013 until 2019, he averaged right around, sorry, I'm doing the math in my head, 600 yards a season, 650 yards a season.
And a guy that's based on mock draftable, that's his top physical comp is Pierre Garçon, which is not a bad, like, he had a good stretch for a while.
Right. And so, I mean, the thing is, and obviously this is why range of outcomes is so important. And Sanu is like, a middle of the road best, I think would be, like you said, a good comp.
Yeah.
Is Michael Thomas. And so, obviously want to go that high.
All right. Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals talking about, let's talk about the guys that he took on day 3, 5 of them. That's coming next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Mr. Cardinals talk on the web. We're on day 3. The Cardinals ended up with 5 selections. When they traded out of the 3rd round, they picked up a 4th-round pick, 2 5th-round picks, and then they had 2 6th-rounders already. Round 4, this guy that we, if you like some analytics, this is the guy you should be the most excited about. UCLA guard John Gaines, and I will say this: day 3, Monty wouldn't admit it. We asked him about it. The theme of day 3 picks was plus athletes. Every single one of the guys that they drafted on day 3 was a plus athlete for their.
I highly disagree. I think the theme of day 3 was that Monty Austinfort subscribes to this podcast and the original Draft Breakdown podcast, and talked and picked up guys that Seth too. So, first up, obviously, is John Gaines, a guy we talked about, right, on the podcast.
Athletic.
One of the freakiest athletes ever at the guard position, and I'm not saying that lightly. Literally, one of the best athletes ever at the guard position. I mean, it's incredible, and his high end comp, again, super high end. Probably never going to get there because it's just so high end as Joel Bitonio.
Yeah.
right? So obviously, that was something. But let's go a little lower down. Let's go a little less all pro-y, if you will, because again, one of the worst things about comps is when you start handing out all pros to people. But what if you end up with a guy like Ali Marpet, right? The guy that ended up playing really well. He made one Pro Bowl, so I mean, it's still
But he
a
had a great
high-end comp,
7-year run.
and he retired.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I mean, he was just like 100 games in the NFL, made a good amount of money. All right, deuces, I'm out of here. Like, won a Super Bowl.
Well,
I'm 30. I'm 30, and I've got all my health. Like, I
right.
made it.
But we've got to mention, and I wrote an article about it. This is something that I think we need to get out there, and this comes from Josh Norris. Didn't he used to be, though he's on some fantasy thing, but where did he used to be Draft Network?
No, he was Roto Underworld.
Okay.
Guru
So
forever.
So he found this. He found this number trying to track some sort of cheat code. Like if you're going to moneyball it, there's one particular number in the combine that predicts success. He found it for offensive linemen, and that's the 4.47 short shuttle. Since 2010,
4.74, isn't it, or is it 4.47?
It's 4.47. It's 4.47,
which is again insane.
Yes. So since 2010, there's only 28 players, offensive linemen, who did that at the combine. 24 of them drafted. Now 25 out of 29. And so that's before this year. So and Gaines was the only one that met this. So it's 25 out of 29 players who have hit that benchmark on the short shuttle have been drafted. Now, before this year was 24 to 28, and of those 24 players, they accounted for 84% of their games were starts, which is, it's not the best metric, but it's a really good metric in terms of the type of quality player they are that they start games. And that 84% is a significant thing. And if you add to that, a 25th player out of the 28 includes Jake Brendel of the 49ers, who is now developed into their starting center. He bounced around for a little bit, became the starting center 2 years ago, or last year, and just signed an extension. He will be the starting center for the 49ers moving forward. So now you've got, John Gaines is the one, and it's insane some of the numbers that it goes across. First round pick, second round pick, third round, all the way through round 7, they turn into starters. It does not everything is like perfectly, but it is as close as you can find as a cheat code. And he can play anywhere on the line.
He legitimately has lined up at every offensive line position, and he played hundreds of snaps at center. I know people are a little irritated about it, but it is true. It's it's a situation that's true. It's accurate. Like, you cannot love it. And real quick, just so people know that this isn't a made up or like anything like that type of thing. In the 4th round, or I shouldn't say that, in the 3rd round and on, these are the guys that have hit that number and then started games that you have. You've got Joe Noteboom, who's started a lot of games. You've got Ezra Cleveland, who started a lot of games. You've got Joe Haig, who started a lot of games. Obviously, Jason Kelsey. You've got David Quisenberry. You've got Matt Paredes, who I believe was a center for a long time.
He was.
And he started, he literally started for 6 seasons. You've got Chase Roulier, who's a center, I believe, and then Charles Leno, easy enough to say, right? Charles Leno, who was a 7th rounder. So, like, this isn't just like, oh, if
crazy.
If you draft a guy in the top, 20, and this works out. No,
this goes across the draft.
Right. And so, like I said, like his highest end comp is Joel Bitonio, who's on this list, and then his like mid-range comp, what you hope he gets to is Ali Marpet, who's on this list, right? But like even if you get a Charles Leno level player in the fourth round, I mean, and again, Leno's made a Pro Bowl. Now they played Leno at left tackle, so again, that's a little different. But even if you get a Charles Leno level player, that's a win. Like that's a good pick. Obviously, like I said, if you end up with a Matt Paredes or a Roulette, I think both of those guys would be ideal. And Paredes was a center, so and he was Peyton Manning's last center, I believe, was on the Super Bowl team that year. So again, you're talking about guys that have had good careers, and this guy's just I love this pick in the fourth round. Like this is kind of the opposite of what the Cardinals had been doing along the offensive line, in terms of guys, right? Like, and we like a lot of the guys that they've taken, had hope for them, but you look at it like, shoot, I mean, you can go back a long time, right? But let's just go with like the day 3 guys, and so you start with Dorian Johnson, right?
Dorian Johnson, unathletic,
super unathletic, 6'5", 305, so the same sizes. I know Gaines is only 6'3" and 7/8", but 6'4", fourth round pick, didn't even get out of camp. Man.
Did not.
Like, and because he was so unathletic. Mason Cole's been a guy that's stuck around for a while. He started 56 games in his career, so I think you can say that was a pretty decent pick.
Evan Boehm didn't really do much.
No, Evan Boehm didn't do anything. Keep looking. Lamont Gaillard.
Yeah, Lamont Gaillard hasn't done much. Now Cole Toner stuck around for a little while.
Yeah,
he's managed to stick around for quite some time. Will Holden actually, I believe, has changed. He's converted to tight end, I believe.
Which I think you and I joked about on this show when they drafted him because he was so thin. But it's just a departure. I mean, we talked about it, off the air, but Michael Manette, the center from Penn State, where you're like, wait, is this a 35-year-old social studies teacher?
Yes,
like what are we getting out of here? You mentioned, and even the guys last year who they like and who knows what they do, but Marquise Hayes, a big boy that doesn't exactly move extremely well, and Lecitus Smith, another,
Lecitus though fits. He kind of fits more of what like this, right? Because he's on the he moves a little better, right?
Yeah, he's a 4.78, so he's less obviously, and
no, he was high above average on the 40, but average to below average for most of the other metrics.
But and one of the things that we're finding a lot on these guys is, obviously the short shuttle but also that broad jump. If these guys don't have the explosiveness out of their stance, because that's what the broad jump shows, and that's what I was talking about with Ojulari earlier. Like the broad jump is an explosive start, right? And so you're talking about Michael Wilson. His 10-yard split is explained by how explosive he is in the broad jump, right? Like he's really explosive out of the gate, and that makes up for the 4.58 speed. And so Gaines is not just explosive that way, but he's explosive in every way. But that was just the tip of the iceberg, right? Because all of a sudden you get maybe the next Josh McCown.
I will say I didn't like the pick. 5th round pick, Clayton Tune, quarterback out of Houston. But here's my thing. My reason I don't like it is because there were players I would have much rather had than getting a quarterback. And if the quarterbacks, he's a plus athlete, he was highly productive, he's prototypical size, so he's athletic and the right size. He can make the throws. He's got that edge to him like you like quarterbacks to have. He's a leader. But when you had guys on the board like Izzy Abouakandi out of Pitt,
Yeah.
or the safety that we loved out of Cal, Daniel Scott, I would have rather the Cardinals gone that route than a quarterback that I don't like. I get what people were saying about the backup quarterback position. You can get cost controlled. I just think so many holes on the roster. That's a future. That's kind of a future thing to worry about, especially when you have, like, if he had to play this year, you're not going to get more production than you're going to get out of Josh. You're not going to have Colt McCoy or David Blau or Jeff Driscoll or whoever ends up playing. That's more of a thing for down the line, and I know that's a good thing to have. I just wish they'd gone a different direction.
Well, so, and I would love to give credit to whoever said this. So I don't remember exactly who said it, but they basically, in a nutshell, so I'm paraphrasing, said Brock Purdy just got 9 guys drafted.
Oh yeah, I believe that. So yes, totally. The fact that he did what he did after being the last pick, player Jack, like, we can't miss on that happens every time someone at a particular position succeeds that got passed over multiple times. That position or that type of player gets overdrafted every time after that.
Right, and so
I get it. I just don't love it. I felt it was a waste of a pick when there were players I would have rather have them drafted. My pick. I don't know enough about. I didn't watch Clayton Tune play. Talking to him on the conference call, he's an intriguing dude. I like the fact that he's a plus athlete. But we'll see. I mean, that's the one.
And I told you, because when you asked, Tune was one of the guys I would take in the third round, day 3, because that's how much I think of him as a potential backup. He is. He's a guy that is competitive. He has really good athleticism, and he's able to move around in the pocket. Like I said, Josh McCown is an incredibly, incredibly high end comp. Like, I don't want people to think that that's actually a bad thing. That's an incredibly high end comp.
Guy played like 20 years in the NFL.
Right. Like, you're talking about a guy that played and started for almost 18 years.
In 2 different decades, okay? He started in 2 different decades. Now, he didn't start a lot of games in between, but he was a starter in 2 different decades.
I mean, he started 76 games in his career. He threw 98 touchdowns and had less interceptions. So, like, he was a good NFL quarterback. So, yeah, I mean, it's just one of those situations, again, it's a super high-end comp, but, like, I think that's his type of ceiling you could get to.
Their next 5th round pick, love him. Auburn's Owen Papo, another freaky athlete. I don't remember. You talked about him when we did our defensive preview, I recall. And he's undersized. He's built like a defensive back. He's built like a safety. And he gave, like, just looking at the physical profile, minus I'm like, that's Kaiser White. That's what Jonathan Gannon said about him today. When he gave him Kaiser White vibes. So he's fired up. Like, he was expecting this. He's ready to get on the field already. He, like, talking to him on the conference call was something else. And then on top of that, you got freaky athleticism across the board. Now, it's not quite as freaky as when you see Isaiah Simmons running a 4.39 at 6'4", 238. But Papo ran a 4.39 40. And doesn't it feel like, and we kind of know, that's kind of the range, if you're looking at a linebacker that they want on the field, it's a high athletic, intelligent player that they can get on day 2 or day 3. I could totally see him playing, because it doesn't. I think Kaiser White's going to be their middle linebacker this year. I think, the way it sounds right now. But in Isaiah Simmons playing the Kaiser White role that Kaiser White played last year for the Eagles, that would be a perfect spot for Papo in 2024, right?
Yeah, and again, it's a guy that they're they're banking on traits and a guy that can, you know, with his, like you said, freaky athleticism, be able to give them a little bit more. Gosh, I'm trying to remember the guy's name. I'm looking up old Titans rosters right now because there's a guy. There it is. That's who it reminds me of. There was a guy that the Titans drafted in the 5th round that's started a ton of games in the NFL. I think that was when before Monty was there, but he was there. They had some crossover, and he wasn't as athletic as Papoa. So, the comp's not perfect, but Jayon Brown, he was another undersized guy that started a lot of games, went in the 5th round. Now Brown is way, way more athletic. Papoa is way more athletic. Brown was like a 4.7 guy, but like size wise and usage wise, I could see that being something. But like you said, the Kaiser White, the ability to fit him into this defense, it all makes sense. And I mean, the crazy thing is, Papoa's more athletic than even like a Kaiser White. Like it's his athleticism's just super, super intriguing and super interesting to kind of follow along with because he's so athletic.
Yeah. And so I love the pick. I gave that pick an A or an A minus. Like I don't know what there is not to like. I couldn't have. You look at the players who are available, and I'm like, he's great. Then we go to the 6th round. They have 2 selections. The first of which is Louisville cornerback Keitrell Clark, and then with their final selection, they go with West Virginia defensive lineman Dante Stills. Again, both of them plus athletes. Keitrell Clark is a guy that I really liked because of the upside. He's got that dog mentality that they talk about. He's fired up. He was a top 30 visit. His name was known as the Cardinals had interest. So when he was drafted, it was no surprise at all. And
oh, really wasn't, was it?
We're like, oh, they're Keitrell. He's probably going to go. Yep, it was Keitrell Clark. That was one of the picks. Like it was the opposite of every single pick before that when Luke Whippler was on the board. Like they're going to pick Luke. They're going to pick, and then never. Tony Pauline just that's one of those things why.
Man, did he get some bad advice?
Oh man, because that's that reason. Like as a network, he gets a lot of information, and he shares that, and that's fine. That's good because he's getting information. He talks to a lot of people, but his stuff is not always, especially when it talks about who people are interested in. He reported that he heard the dead set the Cardinals will draft Luke Whippler, so we were all waiting for it. Because it all makes sense. They need a center. He's a center. He's one of the better centers in the draft class. And then all the other centers are going, and he doesn't go till round 6. I'm like, oh, wow.
It's a bad look. It's a bad look to be that. Arrogance probably not the right word, but like that,
or to present it like that.
Right, exactly.
But Keitrell Clark. Again, he's not. Like they drafted 2 cornerbacks who are not in terms of the physical profile, they don't give you exactly what you want in terms of length, but they give you other things that he isn't as plus an athlete as a lot of other. He is fast. So he's got 89th percentile 10-yard split. His 4.42 40 and 78th percentile, but everything else is his vertical was in the 30th 30 percentile, so the vertical was at 34.5, which is by all means, hey, that's fantastic. I can't do that. Broad jump at 10'2", and
the broad was good. It was average, I should say.
Yeah,
and so,
but he does have small hands and small arms, and he's lean.
He is lean. That's one of the big things with him. You've got a guy that is going to have to show that he's able to um, play that physicality or use that physicality. His change of his change of direction is kind of the most worrisome thing for me. His high end would be like a Jonathan Jones, the guy that's in, I think, New England right now.
Yeah.
That would be his high end, and he was undrafted, I want to say. So, that would be something that would be a good outcome for the Cardinals, obviously. It's just going to be interesting to follow him because he's a guy that, like you said, it was, I don't want to say obvious, but like it was one of those situations that became clear that they liked him quite a bit. So we'll see how this all works out.
He had great on the ball production because he had 25 career pass breakups in addition to his 5 interceptions. So he had really good on ball production, which is good. So that's one of the metrics that you and Justin like, is that on ball production. And then Dante Stills, they finally addressed the defensive line. On the board was still Moro Ojomo, and on the surface I'd rather than I looked at the two players. I'm like, okay, they both played 5 years, so they're both older. Stills was more productive and is more athletic, and Ojomo was a player that guys were saying round 3 he could go. I love the Stills pick because you get a highly athletic interior defender. There's always a plus side to that. It rarely, especially in round 6, it's never a bad pick. And there was really, if looking at the guys that were left on the board, there wasn't anybody else I'm like, I would have rather had him. I looked at the names, I thought I might rather have Moro Ojomo out of Texas. Then I looked at the two and I compared the two. I'm like, oh, Stills is the better pick.
Yeah, and I talked about it the other day. He kind of has a comp similar to Redding, who played a long time in the NFL. Now he was a 3rd round pick, but coming out, I think he was, and he got big over his career. But coming out, he was 6'4", 279. So like he went from 6'4", 279 to 6'4", 318 at the end with the Cardinals. And obviously I think Redding would be a super high end comp. Again, that's like the best case scenario for him.
And mock draftable physically matches up with Jonathan Babineau, who would be a very, very good comp, a very high-end comp.
Right. Again, so you look at it, something like that would be ideal. Babineau was, I think, a 2nd-round pick. Ironically, Redding had a better career, but they both played forever. I mean,
yeah.
Babineau was with the Falcons for 12 years. I mean, so again,
the one thing that you worry about, is you'd say you see the 8th percentile in bench press, you're like, whoo, and then you look and like, oh, he put up 20 reps of 225. That's not weak. I guess that's not weak. It's just not. I guess that puts I guess what you're saying here, what we look at here is that from 20 you go to 21, that jumps you up significantly, or you go to 22, that jumps you up significantly in the percentiles, doesn't it? Because if at 20 he's in the 8th percentile, that means like minimal increases that percentile significantly, because what is it? What is probably average, around 25?
For a D line, yeah, I would think so. I would think that 25 is probably,
so 5 more reps and he's average. So that 5, that's 225. That seems significant, but I still love the pick. He doesn't that make him the most athletic guy on that D line?
Oh man, yeah. Unfortunately, right?
Right. I'm like, they have a bunch of just guys, and so we now we have an athletic freak on that defensive line, and he's their last pick in the draft. Well,
right.
We'll see what happens. we will see what happens with that. I liked the picks. Like Garrett Williams is the biggest question mark for me, and Clayton Tune. Like, and people have been at me. I'm like, I get it. I get there's value in it. I just personally, I wanted different players there. For me, that was my least favorite pick was the quarterback pick, and sure he might be, but I wanted to go like they didn't address the running back position, which I feel that they needed to do, and there was a really good running back that I liked from Pitt that was right there on the board. They didn't need it, but I thought Daniel Scott was a great pick at that point in the draft.
Yeah, and I mean, but you look at it, the overall theme, like you said, on day 3,
plus athletes.
Yeah, athletes, but not just athletes, right? So I think, I mean, that's definitely
they still were very, very high character guys.
Well, and high character too. But one of the things that you saw was productive college players. So, like, again, one of the things that we go back to, and you don't want to beat the dead horse too much. Like Chard Lawrence, guy that you and I both like middling production and injuries through most of his career, right? And again, 4th round pick, so you're taking a chance on a guy when he's healthy. He's been fine. He's probably their best defensive lineman when healthy. Lecky Fotu, again, middling production,
freak athlete
in college. Yeah, more athlete. But like you look at the guys like Dante Stills, Keitrell Clark, Clayton Tune. These are high. I mean, Dante Stills had 7 sacks last year, 4.5 this year. He had 15,
24 and a half sacks in his career, 53 tackles for loss. He had no fewer than 9 tackles for loss in each of the last 4 seasons.
Right. And you look at it, and again, I'm not trying to pick on like Lecky or Rashard Lawrence, but like Rashard Lawrence best season, he had 10 tackles loss. That's like the average for Dante Stills, right? Lecky Fotu never had over 7 tackles for loss. He had 4 sacks total in his career. So like they were going more towards the Mark Wilson type of players with productivity in their past, played a lot of games.
I thought Jalen Redmond would have been a type of player they got, but he ended up going undrafted, which is like. But getting Stills, who is the same type of profile, that worked for me, honestly.
Right, and I think part of it is Stills was just more productive.
Yeah, absolutely, he was.
I mean, like you said, Redmond had 1 good year. Redmond had a good freshman year, and a decent senior year, where Stills had like 3 good years. And so it's just balancing it out. But that's what I said. It's like, it was interesting to see their first draft. And like we said, it's the first one. So we're taking notes, but we're not
sold yet on the.
We're not sold on the plan on how they're doing.
But it looks like there's a trend. We'll see if that happens in 2024, where they have 11 picks right now.
I know, right? And potentially, not potentially, 6 in the top 100 for sure, and potentially 6 in the top 175 or something like that.
That's crazy. But we should probably wrap up the show. We're closing in on an hour 40. It's like a movie. This is the motion picture version of the Rise Up See Red podcast. But anyway, we will be back for a show later this week. We'll talk about some of the other minor issues. DeAndre Hopkins didn't get traded. Isaiah Simmons' option wasn't picked up. We'll have a shorter episode coming up later this week. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. This is Rise Up See Red podcast. Thanks for listening as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.
Run!